Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to The Outsider's Perspective. My name's Ollie, and this is the last vlog in my series on spiritual exploration. Yes, I know, episode 10 was supposed to be a wrap-up, but I felt the need to do a wrap-up for the wrap-up. Because in episode 10, even though I tried to encapsulate what the previous 9 episodes were all about, I feel like I left a lot of information on the cutting room floor. So here I am with a little unscripted video for you folks to try and wrap up all of the loose ends. But before we get to the loose ends, first I have to say thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for spending time out of your busy life to hang out with me and to listen to my sometimes unfocused ramblings and rantings. Now, I know that the last 10 episodes that I made were all scripted, so hopefully I was able to stay on topic and I was able to remain more focused than usual. That was the whole point of changing up the channel and of scripting my videos ahead of time. So maybe you can let me know in the comments below how I did with that. For me, the experience of trying to make videos that are more thematically connected, in this case the theme being spiritual exploration, that experience was a mixed bag for me. There were definitely a lot of pros to it, but I think that I overcommitted. By committing to do 10 episodes on one topic, I found that when I got to about episode 6 or 7, not only was I falling behind on the scripting and recording, but I was also getting a bit burnt out. And quite honestly, I was getting a little bit tired of talking about spiritual exploration in so many different ways. Now, I know that it was essential and necessary because spiritual exploration is not something that you can just kind of summarize in a 5-minute video. But on the flip side, for me personally, I'm the kind of guy who likes to keep it, switching it up every once in a while. So I found that 10 episodes on one topic was a little heavy for me. So this was a good learning experience for me. I learned a lot from it, and now I can use that information to readjust and basically come back at you with renewed zeal and passion. So let's tie up some loose ends, shall we? One of the things that I said in probably the last or second to last video is that spiritual exploration is actually just one part of a larger process. And so I imagine some of you might be wondering what this larger process is. And if you have been watching this channel for a while, i.e. if you've been watching since before I rebooted the channel, then you're probably aware of the sort of bigger picture that I'm talking about. And that is the art of living. Spiritual exploration and the art of living are completely interwoven and interconnected together. One leads to the other and leads back to the other, and it just kind of goes back and forth like this. Every time you do a round of exploration, every time you go within yourself and uncover some new faulty belief or some new thing that you need to uproot, what you're really doing is you're getting rid of these impediments, erroneous beliefs, unrealistic expectations. Those types of things are actually impediments to living the good life. They cause us to suffer needlessly, and the whole point of spiritual exploration is to go in there, identify them, and get rid of them. But as you know, nature abhors a vacuum. So when you yank a belief out, if you don't do anything else, new beliefs will automatically kind of crowd in to take its place. And so it's crucial that you don't just uproot beliefs and then leave it at that. What you have to do is plant new seeds. For every erroneous belief you get rid of, you need to plant new seeds to take its place, and you need to be deliberate about this. As you get rid of harmful, invalid, and worthless beliefs, you have to replace them with valuable, valid, and worthwhile beliefs, right? And these are the types of beliefs that are going to help you live well. Essentially, what we're talking about here is building your own belief system. And a belief system is really just a protocol for living well. At least that's what it's intended to be. Whether the belief systems that are out there right now are actually succeeding at this is obviously up for debate. In my opinion, many of them are not. They're failing to do this. They're not providing proper guidance, especially in this day and age. But since you're a spiritual explorer now and you're going within yourself, you get to choose what you believe. You get to become the author of your story, as I put it. And so, yeah, the whole point is you want to build a story that fits with your experience, your reality, right? What you've learned, what you know, what you think you know, and you have to keep refining it. And that's why the spiritual exploration process never ends. Periodically, I have to go back within and make sure that what I have chosen for myself, the beliefs that I have chosen for myself, are still in alignment with my experience of reality and with my experience of being. So it's constant. You go back in to make sure that no erroneous beliefs have taken root. You go back in to make sure that what you've planted is still the right thing for you. Now, as I promised at the end of episode 10, I'm going to spend more time talking about my personal belief system, which I have dubbed modern mysticism. Now, before I started recording this video, I went online and I Googled modern mysticism. Obviously, I'm not the first person to use this term, but the way that I'm using it might be novel, so I'll just explain real quick. When I Googled modern mysticism, it was basically talking about how the term mystic has become kind of watered down and distorted in the modern era. So I think that's why the words modern and mysticism kind of triggered that. And I agree. I mean, just one example off the top of my head, the Marvel movie, Doctor Strange, you know, he's called the master of the mystic arts. And if you've seen that movie, you see what he's doing with, you know, time travel and magic and all this stuff. And it's like, it's not what mysticism is. I'm not suggesting that I'm like Doctor Strange by any means. But I will explain what mysticism means to me and what modern mysticism means, what it entails, and how I arrived at this belief system. Actually, I don't really have to talk about that part of it because I already just spent 10 videos explaining how I arrived at this belief system. I've been engaged in spiritual exploration. I've been discovering faulty beliefs that I've been holding, getting rid of them. And oftentimes when you get rid of a belief, you don't actually get rid of it. Oftentimes when you get rid of a belief, you know, what you're really doing is consolidating it, because there are valid aspects to the belief. There are valuable aspects even. And so when you get rid of all the worthless crap, you're left with this little nugget of wisdom or insight. And so you're not really getting rid of the full belief. You're just getting rid of the parts of the belief that are not accurate. And oftentimes, you know, behind these faulty assumptions that we harbor, there are valid, real truths there. But they've just been kind of buried in a pile of bullshit. And so really what you're doing is getting rid of the bullshit and keeping the good stuff. You always have to have beliefs. Even having no beliefs is a belief, you know. It's a form of belief. You're like, you know, I don't believe anything. Well, that's a belief. You know, and like my good friend Grego says, no belief is true. Well, that's a belief too. So, you know, you can't really get out of it. You are going to have beliefs. And if you get rid of beliefs in your mind and in your heart, new ones will take their place. So you have to be the arbiter, right? You have to choose which beliefs take their place. Otherwise, it's going to be the same as before. You're going to inherit them unconsciously, you know, not by deliberate choice. They're just going to kind of snake their way into your mind. And then all of a sudden, you're going to be believing different bullshit than you were before. Now I want to give you some concrete examples of what I would call core assumptions, these kind of underlying beliefs that are never explicitly stated and never really consciously held, but they influence all of the explicit and conscious opinions and beliefs that we hold. So it's kind of like a house, right? The house is going to reflect the foundation, but the foundation is buried underground, so it's hard to get to. The point of spiritual exploration is to keep digging until you get to these really core foundational beliefs that you hold. And then you need to examine those beliefs and see whether they are valid or not. So as I proceeded along this path of spiritual exploration, as I kept digging down through the layers of belief and opinion and narrative that I had accumulated from the first, 27 years of my life, I eventually got to these really foundational core assumptions. And there are a number of these that I discovered, and they were all inaccurate in some way, shape, or form. And upon closer inspection, I was able to see that there was some truth to them, but it was just distorted and hidden by, like I said before, a bunch of bullshit. So I think probably the deepest, most foundational assumption that I had always kind of internalized and that I discovered on this path is what I would call confusion between conceptual reality and actual reality. It's kind of a tricky one to talk about because you have to use concepts to talk about it, and so you're kind of watering it down, but I'll try to give you a quick illustration. There's a difference between the concept of Oliver and Oliver in reality. I have a concept of myself in my mind, an image, a list of attributes that I think I embody, a story about where I'm from and who's my family and all these other things. That's the concept of Oliver. The reality of Oliver is not a name, a role. It's not where I've been or, what I like and dislike. The reality is indescribable. The concept is a reflection of the reality, but the concept is not the reality, okay? So this is something that I've talked a lot about on this channel. Alan Watts said it really well. The menu is not the meal. The map is not the territory. Say it however you want to say it. This is, I think, the most foundational misunderstanding that I had as a human being until very recently. And it causes a whole bunch of other misunderstandings. So I think that a lot of the other core assumptions that I was holding on to were kind of rooted in this one piece of misinformation, which is that the concept and the reality are actually just kind of one and the same and interchangeable. This is a huge pitfall because when you think that or believe that, you place equal importance on the concept as you do on the reality that it indicates. And that's a trap, big problem, because the concepts are just labels, right? They're pointers. They point to the reality, but they're not the reality itself. So this leads me to the next assumption, or the next kind of core belief that I had, which was erroneous. And that is egocentrism, the belief that I'm the center of the universe. And this is a tricky one too, because our personal experiences of life, each and every one of us, indicates that we are indeed the center, right? Everything you experience from your point of view, and it's taking place around you. You're literally the center of the universe. Now, this is, again, never explicitly stated. I never woke up in the morning and thought, I'm the center of the universe. But my behavior and my other opinions and beliefs indicated that that was my belief, right? Like, if I looked at myself and listened to my own rationale and I traced it back far enough, I came to this conclusion, which was that, I believe I'm the center of the universe. So again, these core assumptions, oftentimes they're discovered not by direct inquiry, but by looking at your own behaviors and your own conscious and explicit opinions, and then trying to find their root causes. Right? Eventually you get back to this idea that it's like, well, I must believe that I'm the center of the universe. There's no other explanation for why I would act like a selfish asshole, or why I get mad when somebody cuts in front of me in traffic. Like, I'm the center. How dare they do this to me, right? And this is kind of like, if we're using the story metaphor, this is kind of like when you're the protagonist in the story. You're not the author yet. You're still just a character and you're helpless, right? Because the protagonist is just a creation of the author. So when you're the protagonist in the story, you're the center of the universe. You think everything revolves around you. And how dare they speak to me this way? Me, like, who am I? That's another underlying assumption that I found when I started digging. And the reason it's connected to the first one about concept versus reality is that the thing that believes it's the center of the universe, the ego, is a concept. As I said, right? The concept of Oliver, that's the ego. The self transcends the concept, is much more than the concept, is rooted in something far different. The ego is just a product of the mind. It's an assembly of different labels, roles, masks, whatever. And, the ego isn't real. So it's a helpful construct because it gives you a sense of permanence, right? Like, I'm Oliver, I've always been Oliver. But again, it's just a concept. And the concept is not actually the center of anything. It's just a helper. So what happens when you kind of pick away at this belief of egocentrism and you start to examine what it's really about, you realize that the truth is cosmocentrism. That is, the universe is the center of the universe. There is no center. Everywhere is the center, and No one center takes precedence over another. And as a human being, obviously, I feel that my life has maybe more immediacy and more importance than the lives around me, but that's a false belief. That's rooted in egocentrism. So cosmocentric basically decentralizes the whole picture, and you realize that even though you do feel like you are the center, you're just one of many centers, and in fact, one of infinite centers. And that tends to change your outlook on life a little bit. Especially when you really feel the truth of this, the interconnectedness of all things. Anyway, so that's the second one. Another erroneous assumption that I held for a long time was the idea that there's such a thing as permanence, that there are static objects, out in the world, and these things are permanent, concrete, and never changing. And that one, again, is rooted in concepts, because when you conceptualize something, it becomes a separate entity and it has kind of a life of its own, right? But in reality, it's just as interconnected to everything else as you and I are. And so, the concept that the desk exists gives it its own separate existence. But in reality, the desk is just interconnected to the whole universe. And in fact, to think that it's static and unmoving is false once again. If we use the scientific method of inquiry and we employ some of our fancy tools that we've invented, we see that the actual desk itself at the molecular or atomic level is constantly moving and changing and shifting. And even though we can't detect that with our eyes, it's true nonetheless. So permanence is not a thing. Everything is constantly in flux, and we just lack maybe the senses and the sufficiently long lifespan to see things deteriorate. But everything is in a constant state of deterioration and regeneration, and it's like a pendulum, right? Swinging back and forth. But if you have a pendulum that's swinging fast enough, it looks like a concrete object, right? You don't actually see the movement, you just see kind of the U shape, right? When you slow it down, you see that it's actually moving. Next up on the list of inaccurate beliefs that I got rid of, we've got the idea of theism, the idea of an anthropomorphic God. Now, I never believed in that God, and in fact, that whole concept of God was the reason that I had no belief in any kind of divine existence or higher power. Because everywhere I turned, and most of the people that I knew who believed in a God, they put forth this image of God of an invisible, bearded sky daddy. And that to me was always nonsense. I could never ever wrap my head around that or even take one step toward believing it. But that was the concept that I held, that God was this invisible sky daddy and therefore that he didn't exist, because such a ridiculous idea. But then, as I started to learn and explore and study, and especially as I started to read the works of people like Marcus Aurelius and Lao Tzu and the Bhagavad Gita, Khalil Gibran, all of these people that have deeply influenced me and guided me on my way, I realized that this concept of God, a theistic God, an anthropomorphic God that is essentially a human sitting in the clouds, I realized that notion was deeply flawed. And as I started to readjust, I saw that a lot of the things that, theists say about God actually are true. But they're a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of the metaphor. So to me, this whole idea of God is a misunderstanding, and to ascribe human qualities to it is not wrong, but it's a gross oversimplification, right? God is much more than just an invisible bearded sky daddy. So anyways, my concept of God shifted from that to more of a pantheistic idea, which is, of course, that God is everything and in everything. And even to call it God is kind of just a misnomer, because that tends to spark a lot of associations to especially the Abrahamic religion. So sometimes I just call it Dharma, Logos, Brahman, whatever, nature. I think nature is probably the least controversial term that I use, because no one can really deny that nature is a thing. I mean, we are nature experiencing itself right now. Last but not least on the list of erroneous ideas, the idea of time, the concept of time, as opposed to the reality of presence. The idea that time is a real thing that exists, and that, it's almost like a resource. I have lots of time on my hands, or I'm out of time. This whole idea I lived with for my whole life until I realized that it was, again, a fabrication. Time is movement. Time is motion. And again, it's a concept that is helpful when we remember that it's not real. You just take the Earth's movement and you divide it into different parts, right? 24 parts for the day, 30 parts for the month, 12 parts for the year. You're just basically dividing and subdividing. But what you're really taking into account here is motion and movement, right? The rotation of the Earth's orbit around the sun. This is the basis for time, the concept of time. In reality, all that we have is this present moment. And this present moment is all that's ever been. There is no past and there is no future. These things are conceptual. They don't actually exist in reality. So again, another variation of that first belief I shared with you. The belief that concepts are not the same as reality. So anyways, I hope those examples were useful and that they will lead you to a good place in your own journey of exploration. And I'm quite happy now to leave that topic behind for the time being and to move on to different things. And some of the different things that I'll be moving on to in the near future and that you can expect to see on this channel probably in the next week or so. The first one, very excited about this, I'm starting an online book club. So starting next week, you'll see some more videos dropping. Again, some of them will just be me reading with no image. It'll just be kind of a backdrop, right? And then following that, I will put out a commentary video where we can discuss what we've read together. So I encourage you, if you don't have a copy already, pick up a copy of The Emperor's Handbook. It's my favorite translation of the meditation. It's also a very modern, accessible translation. So pick up a copy, and starting next week, we'll start with the first book in the meditations, and hopefully you'll join me for that. Looking forward to it. And the other thing that you'll see on this channel going forward are videos that are probably roughly the same length as the ones I've been doing, 5 to 10 minute range. But instead of being all connected in a single sort of theme, I'm just going to be jumping around a little bit more. I want to address, current events like COVID, like all the fallout from COVID. There are probably other current events I want to talk about, but that one is looming quite largely in a lot of people's minds. So I want to address that one, and I want to talk about it at length. So yeah, the videos that I'll be dropping now will be less connected to each other. They'll be more like standalone videos, and that way I can just kind of talk about whatever I feel like talking about, and I don't have to follow a plan. I can just start scripting individual videos and put them out as I feel like. So that's my plan for the future. So again, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you next week with the first book of The Emperor's Handbook, The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Until then, live well, my friends.